I built an office desk a few years back out of butternut slabs, and recently I built a coffee table to match the desk. At the time I built the desk, the plan was to buy some IKEA storage cubbies for under the desk. This worked fine for the past year or two, but now it's time to add some matching desk drawers. When I started planning this build, my thought was to use plywood for the drawer carcass like any other build. But after researching how and where to get butternut plywood, I found out that not only is it pretty rare, but it's also way too expensive to order and have delivered. So I'm going to go with plan B, which is to use the several slabs I have left over from the desk and coffee table build, break those down and dimension them so I can make panels out of the wood. The good news is, since I'll be using the same tree for every piece in this furniture set, it will match great. The bad news, milling this much wood and making my own panels is definitely a lengthy and tedious process. But like my grandpappy said, anything worth having is worth working for. Just kidding, I just made that up. I've seen some slight variations in the way that people prefer to break down rough cut lumber to S4S milled wood, but the basic process is the same, and this is the method that works best for me. Take it or leave it. I'm going to go through it step by step. After I have my panels all made, we can start to build these pieces of furniture. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm sweating so much today, it's because it's 93 degrees out, and the one thing I overlooked when setting up my shop was air conditioning.
Luke, I am your father.
To get an initial straight edge, I'm first doing a rip cut with my track saw. This gives me a reference edge so that I can then use against my table saw fence to create boards with a parallel edge. If you work with live edge slabs at all, then a good track saw is a must. I love this Festool track saw, but there are a lot of good brands out there if you don't want to spend the money on Festool. I have an 8-foot and 4-foot track, and Festool does make track extenders if you have to rip boards over 8 feet. These slabs are 2+ inches thick, and I usually forget that if I try to rip them in one pass, my blade is going to bind, so it's best to take 3 or more light passes. I have to admit, it's kind of cool to build a whole office set from a tree and mill the wood almost entirely on your own for the whole build. Something satisfying about it. Like following the footsteps of our ancestors. Sure is a pain in the butt, though. I have an 8-inch joiner in my shop that will get used on the next steps, so at the table saw, I want to create some 7.5-inch wide boards. All I need to do is set the table saw to 7.5 inches and create a cut that is parallel to the first. Because this is air-dried lumber, there's going to be a decent amount of defects and splits that I'm going to have to work around, so not all of my boards are going to be at the 7.5-inch goal, but I'll get them as wide as I can. For my final panels, I need several different sizes, but none of them are going to be over 23.5-inch length. So I'm going to cut these boards to 26 inches, which will give me a couple inches of play when I need to cut them down to final dimensions. Here's a tip. When going through the process of milling your lumber to S4S, shorter boards are much easier to manage at the joiner. So I like to break them down before I get to that step. This step is as simple as it sounds. However, no build is ever simple and something always goes wrong. My jointer wasn't giving me flat boards, and I had to bust out the old manual and do some tinkering to get it working smoothly again. After I got it dialed in, just about the worst thing happened. I smelled something burning. About 2 seconds later, total power shutdown. I lost power to the house and the shop. Nothing worked. So after I did some digging, I found out the source of the burning smell was the motor on my dust collector. I shined a light in there and I saw some melted wires. Luckily, I have surge protection for the shop and the house, so all I had to do was reset the breaker and I got power back for both the shop and the house. Unfortunately though, I called an electrician. He took a look at the motor and confirmed that it's absolutely fried, so now I can either replace the motor or replace the entire dust collector. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I got to try and figure that out, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. After that debacle, I'm back at the joiner to square up one edge to the face that I've already flattened. This leaves me with one corner that's 90 degrees, which I can mark and then use at the next step. I'm not really sure why or where I saw this, but I always use 2 triangles to mark my wood. I need boards that are 3/4 inches thick for the outside, and boards that are 5/8 inches thick for the drawers. Luckily, because I'm cutting my stock from slabs, these pieces are about 2 to 2.5 inches thick, so I can resaw them and get 2 to 3 boards out of each one. Now I'm going to head to the planer to plane the opposite face of these boards and bring them to the final thickness that I need. And voila! I've taken a tree and turned it into 5/8 inch thick lumber for this desk project. Now to clean up all this sawdust. Now that I have my lumber all ready, I can glue up all my panels. And there's a lot of panels to glue up. But first, let's get into the woodworking mood. Alright, now that we've got that out of our system, let's get back to the build. So I have to make 5 panels for each pedestal frame, and then 7 to 8 for each of the 2 large drawers. Luckily, the smaller drawers don't need panels. So that's what? 24 to 26 total panels? Wow, it sounds so much worse when you say it out loud. There's definitely parts of every project that are exciting, and some not so much. This would definitely fall into the latter category. Speaking of having tons of panels and parts, I need to label everything so I can keep it all organized. It would be very easy to make all these parts and then mix them all up, something I've definitely never done before. Now that the endless monotony of milling and gluing is over, I can finally start building. This is the fun part.
Now the fun part starts.
The design for this is pretty simple. I'm creating a box that will have 2 drawers in each pedestal that are going to be made with 5/8 inch stock. The lower drawer is going to be big enough to store file folders so that we can get rid of this hideous file cabinet. The top drawer is going to be broken up into several compartments for camera stuff and other little knickknacks. The base of the pedestal will sit on top of 3-inch black feet. On top of the pedestal will be a polished brass accent, and there will be polished brass drawer pulls as well. I did this to match the burnt brass table legs that I have on the desk and coffee table already. As I'm working on assembling these drawer frames, I find myself thinking back about my old shop and how far I've come in woodworking over the last several years. My first shop was in the dungeon of our old house. I call it the dungeon because our old house was, well, just that, pretty old. It had a fieldstone basement, a musty smell, and a gnarly crawl space. It was poorly lit and had almost no ventilation. Still, it was where I developed a passion for the craft and the process of tapping into my creative side. I started with just a miter saw and a set of hand-me-down tools for my family. I found something that I was pretty good at and slowly started putting together some items that I could make well and sell. After a lot of early mornings and late nights before and after work, I was selling enough to upgrade my tools. I upgraded, expanded, and continued to save. Fast forward to now, and my shop is out of our 2-car garage and has all the features of a modern, fully functioning wood shop. I put a lot of time and effort into designing it when we moved here. By the way, if you're interested in seeing what went into the planning and designing process, check out this video through the link in the upper right corner. I'm at a place now that I can take a hiatus on selling and focus more on what I'm passionate about. Working on projects that I find challenging and let me be creative, and finding a way to share it with others through this YouTube channel. Growing this channel is a grind for sure, but it's fulfilling to feel that I may be inspiring others while working on things I enjoy. Not everything I make comes out great. Actually, a lot of it doesn't. But every once in a while, when you get it right, the feeling of accomplishment is pretty darn cool. If you enjoy the content I make, are learning new techniques, getting inspiration for your own projects, then please consider following my channel and engaging with the content. I would love to hear from everyone out there on what type of content you'd like to see, what challenges you face in your own shop, and answer any questions you might have. With the frames assembled, I can focus on the drawers themselves. I have all my panels made and labeled, hopefully correctly. Now I just need to cut them to final dimensions. First up is the large drawer parts, of which I need 6 pieces times 2 for 2 drawers. I'm first cutting them to correct width on the table saw, then to correct length on the miter saw. Then I'm running them through my drum sander to save me a ton of sanding later on. I repeat the process for the 2 smaller drawers. By the way, if you don't own a drum sander, you can still sand these pieces with your orbital sander. It's just going to take a bit more time. Oh yeah, remember how I told you my dust collector got knocked out? Well, that's a big problem when you're using a drum sander. This tool makes a lot of dust. I came up with a super high-tech solution though. I'll just blow it out of the shop with the air compressor. This doesn't seem like a super productive use of time. After I have all my pieces cut, I'm adding the 1/4 inch dado to slide the bottom panel into. I recently saw a video on YouTube from MWA Woodworks on how he assembles drawers, and it looked like a great method, so I'm going to use it here. First, I make sure that my dado is 5/8 of an inch from the bottom. The dado itself is going to be 1/4 inch wide and 1/4 inch deep. I set the depth with my Craig gauge, and to get the 1 inch width, I'm going to take 2 passes on my table saw, since the kerf on my blade is roughly 1/8 inch thick. I only need to add dados on the front and 2 side panels with this method. Once I have that done, I can slide my 1/4 inch thick bottom panel, and the back sits on top. I'm using dominoes for drawer joinery, but there will be no glue on the bottom panel. That will get screwed into the back panel, so that way if I ever need to take it out, I can do that easily. Thank you to MWA Woodworks for this cool method. Works pretty well for me, so I think this is going to be my go-to now for drawers. For your drawer joinery, don't feel like you need to have a domino to make drawers. Pocket hole screws work great as well, and with those, you don't have to wait for the glue to dry. I used pocket hole screws for a long time. You can also use dowels, box joints, dovetails, whatever works best for you. With the drawers assembled, I'm going to get to work putting in my drawer slides, front panels, hardware, and drawer legs. Assembling and installing drawers definitely has a reputation for being difficult, and I have to say, after finishing this project, I'm reminded why. Maybe drawers are easy for some woodworkers out there, and I tip my hat to you guys, but that's definitely not me. I feel like I always struggle through this process. This time it actually went okay with a few minor hiccups, but it just never feels like it goes entirely smoothly. Oh well, maybe someday it will become second nature to me. I cut wood spacers for the top and bottom drawers, and I'm using handy little spacers I got off of Amazon to make sure the drawer fronts have a 1/8 inch gap on all sides. So the first thing I do is put in the spacers I cut for the top drawer slides. Remember to go top to bottom with this process, because if you put in the bottom slides first, it makes it harder to use the spacers for the top slides. Install your slide hardware. Here's a tip. A self-centering drill bit comes in really handy for this step. Then move on to the bottom and put in your slides here. Next, I want my bottom drawer to have a 1/4 inch gap between the bottom of the drawer and the frame bottom. This will allow adequate space for the drawer to slide without catching the bottom. I use a 1/4 inch spacer for this. To put the slide hardware on the drawer itself, pull out the slides and light up the end with the end of your drawer. Put in your first screw here. Then pull the slides out more and put in a second screw. Now you can take the drawer out completely and install a third screw. Once that first drawer is in, I can use some wood spacers on top of the drawer to put in the second drawer. Now for the front plates on the drawers. I first have to take some measurements to figure out where the handle pulls are going. After I hurt my brain doing math and mark the spots, I can drill some holes for the screws. Now I take that back and use my 1/8 inch spacers to make sure the front is spaced correctly. I put 2 screws in through the holes I just drilled for the drawer pulls. This locks the front in place. Now I can slide the drawer open and put in some screws from the inside. Once that's done, I take out the 2 screws that I put in the front and install my drawer pulls. These brass drawer pulls I got are nice, and they match the brass accent I'm going to put in on the top perfectly. Alright, moving on to the feet. The feet I got come with some mounting plates, but if I use them, it would make the entire piece a little too high. So I'm going to improvise here. I'm going to cut these screws down to about half length, mark the location, and then drill a hole through the bottom of the frame. Then use a combination of wood glue and CA glue to secure it in place. These brass accents for the top of the piece definitely took me out of my comfort zone. The only other time I've worked with metal was on my last project when I used brass inlays for the coffee table. I wasn't sure how to pull this idea off, so I first called some companies that mill custom metal parts. My thought was to have them mill a custom brass piece like this, but I haven't quite figured out how to get them a CAD design of the part I need, and after showing them the picture, the price quote I got was way too high. So back to the drawing board. Then I came across this brass metal sheet roll on Amazon and the light bulbs went off. My idea was to create a block of wood in the dimensions I need with the CNC, and then use this brass sheet roll to wrap around it. It's 0.5 millimeters thick, so nice and pliable, and 4 inches high, which is exactly what I need. The only question mark is what would work to secure it to the wood frame. I did some research and decided on a combination of contact cement and Loctite construction adhesive. I really wasn't sure how this would go, and I figured if it was a total fail, I just wouldn't put the accents on top. But to my surprise, it worked pretty well, and I'm pumped with how they came out. Sometimes you have to take risks to see your vision come to life. I've had plenty of fails in the wood shop over the years, so it was nice to have this one be a win. Now I just have endless amounts of sanding to bring these pieces to 1500 grit and put on my finish. I'm using Odie's oil for finish because it's what I have on hand and it's what I use for the desk and coffee table. And there you have it. Desk drawers finished and living room set complete. This was a fun project, but ended up taking way longer than expected. Turns out milling your own wood from tree to finished piece is quite a lengthy process. But the finished product looks pretty good, and it's way cheaper than buying your wood from the hardwood dealer, that's for sure. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this build, check out this video on how I built a double dog kennel.